All right, so connects is a thing. Um, so I want to set some context to why we would take the step of moving from what we did this morning, which admittedly was pretty straightforward. In fact, I could go so far as to say not even really hard in the grand scheme of things, because it's using existing patterns you know. Why we would take the step of going from that to now adding another library, more syntax, extra functions that you have to learn, different patterns that you have to follow, why we would want to go that step. And it's a great question. The good news is there's most of an answer. Connects as a library is what we call a query builder library. Right now, when you want to build a query, you're sitting down and you are writing out a string that includes all of those clauses in SQL in the right order, and you are prone to typos. You are prone to, oh crap, I have to group by both of these columns because I used an aggregation, and all of those things that come up that get in your way. If we had a library that could assemble our SQL queries for us based on chaining some methods together in a nice, easy syntax, that takes some of that guesswork out of it for us. If we had a library where we could run some methods in whichever order we wanted, and it would still build the same query for us, if we had a library where we could even conditionally, like if statements, use certain methods or not other methods, that makes building that SQL string easier. And so having that library now becomes an added value piece to our toolkit, as opposed to being something where it's getting in our way and it's just something extra that we have to learn. It now becomes a partnership in our app building as opposed to a negotiation. And that's where Connects comes in. So Connects is a query builder library, which means it will build your query for you based on you using the method syntax in Connects to tell it what it is you want it to do. So that means you as a developer need to understand the SQL query that you want to run, and then it becomes easy to pick which methods in Connects you're going to run to put together that query. The other nice thing is the process of running that query and then getting the data back is effectively identical to what we did this morning. You're going to tell Connects that you want to use a callback, and you write the callback function. That part's easy. That's back to JavaScript at that point. And Connects is actually going to tidy up the results you get back so that they are easier to work with. So what I'm going to do in order to demonstrate this is the Connects.js site and the documentation, which hopefully you've already had a chance to peruse just a bit, is I'm going to hop into the right directory. One sec. Okay, so this is the code that we worked with this morning. So what I want to do now is shift gears a bit and show how we would accomplish some of these same things using Connects instead of using PG the way we did this morning. So Connects as a library is something that you want to have installed globally on your system. Just going to put that out there. The reason is it has a command line component to it as well. So you want that executable to be available so that just from the command line, you can run the connects commands that are necessary. For example, connects init. You still have to npm install it as part of your project, but you're also going to want to install connects globally on your system. So npm install -g connects. So once I have it installed in my project here, then I can do connects init, and it's going to tell me that it has created a connects file. This is very much how, when I would do, say, an npm init, I'm going to get a package.json. So this is the configuration file for connects. So I want to open that up so that we can talk about it, because there's some interesting stuff going on in here. So we have a module exports. We know what that is. And then we have a big object here that has 3 main keys in it, which are development, staging, and production. So I want to introduce a concept to you called environments. And environments are something that we use in web development quite frequently. And the reason environments become important are because when I'm doing development and I'm running the app here locally on my laptop, that's a different technical environment than when my app is up on AWS or DigitalOcean or Google Cloud and is running there. There's going to be a different configuration, especially when it comes to something like connecting to a database. So my environment is a set of configuration settings that are specific to where my app is running. I would want to have different database username, password, URL for connecting to my database here on my local machine than I would on Google Cloud, for example. Because think about it this way. If the environments were identical and somebody steals my laptop and gets my database password from my laptop, they can now log into my production database and put me out of business. That would be bad. So having different environments gives me the ability to have those different credentials in different places. But it also allows me to configure things to be different. And out of the box, for example, Connects is showing us that it would expect the development environment to use SQLite 3 and a staging or a production environment to use PostgreSQL. The queries are going to be the same. The data is going to be the same. But the type of database connection that it's going to make in each one of those cases is going to end up being different. So Connects is also, while it's a query builder library, it's also what we would call an abstraction. Because now, here's the really cool part. If I'm running PG in my app the way we did this morning, I'm required to run those queries a specific way. There's a specific set of methods I have to use to run those queries against the PG module. And if I had SQLite 3 in there, different methods. If I had MySQL in there, different methods. One brief sec. Hey, I'm lecturing. Can I call you back in an hour? Okay, bye. Sorry about that. So I would have to write my code completely differently, and I don't want to have to build my app where it says, if database is this, run these methods, else if database is this, run these methods, else if database is some other thing, run these other methods. That's a pain in the ass. I want to be able to write my code once and have it run everywhere. Very much like what we talked about last week with jQuery. You know, I don't want to have to write different code for Firefox and for Internet Explorer and for Chrome and Edge. So Connects gives me an abstraction so that I write my queries once using the connect syntax, and then Connects on the back end behind that connects to whatever database it is, and runs the right query to get me the results I need. So I now don't have to worry about whether I'm in development or staging or production. The code that I'm going to write to run my database query is identical. So that's a huge benefit for me as a dev. So that's why, another reason why having these environments is nice, because Connects is just going to respond to whichever environment I'm in, and then make the right database connection, and therefore make the right queries. So because we were working today with a Postgres database, I'm actually just going to copy the stuff for staging over here to development. And I'm going to change the database to hockey. And I don't need a username. Well, the username can just be Don. I don't need a password for my local database. So there's my development set up now to connect to PostgreSQL. Cool, good start. So now what I want to look at is my main.js. So I'm actually going to make a copy of this. I'm going to call it main.connects.js so that we can work with it separately. And I'm going to get rid of both of these lines that were my PG connection. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my connects config in here, because I'm going to require in that connects file. It's got a module.exports in it, so I can just require it in. So now I have my connects config here. And then what I'm going to do is require in connects, and I'm going to run it. And let's go ahead and run it in development mode. So I'm going to run that as a function. So that gets my database set up, connected, and I now have this object connects that I can use. I called it client before, but I'm going to call it connects. And now I'm connected, and I don't need to do that again. Is everybody clear what I did on this line here? Cool. So what we originally had in this case was a query to select city from teams. Let's make it just a little bit easier. I want to select star from teams. Very standard query. And I now don't need a method to run the query. But what I can do is just that. I run connects. I tell it which table I want to select from. And that by itself is select star from teams. That's a lot easier. But now I need a way to deal with the results from this. Now Connects has a couple different patterns I can follow. And if you've been on this site, you have probably seen things like .then. You've probably also seen as callback. There's talk about things like async and await that we haven't really dug too deeply into yet. But at the end of the day, as callback is going to be our best friend. Let's go ahead and there we go. Because callbacks are a pattern we understand. Callbacks are nice and straightforward for us. And so this shows us a connects query where we're selecting just a specific field from a table. We've got where functions that we're running, and another and where. We've got a limit, we've got an offset. And then we run as callback, and guess what? we have a callback function that is error first, and the second parameter is the rows. So, as callback, error rows, we will handle errors. In fact, I'll even do that. And then let's log out what we're getting back in terms of rows. And now this, well, we'll leave that there and we'll come back to it. Look familiar? Should look really familiar, because it's exactly the same thing that PG gave us in the rows key when we selected star from teams before. And it's an array of objects. And it's almost like we had an entire lecture this morning on how to deal with an array of objects when you get them back from a database query. If you don't remember that, there's a YouTube video. It's great. You'll love it. So now I'm in the situation where I have a simpler syntax for running my query, and I know how to deal with callbacks, which means something like this query handler, I can do the exact same thing that I did before, and instead of passing this callback, I can just do that now. Because that's literally all I did was take out the extra key of rows in the query handler. Oops. It helps if you define the function before you use it, ES6 being what it is. I can code really. There's our sorted list of cities, just like we had before. The only change I had to do to the code from what we had this morning is this morning it was res.rows.map. Now it's just res. Like that, it's the result. Because Connects is automatically giving us the rows as the result. Cool so far? Yay. So let's talk about in Connects how we do some of the querying that we might want to do. What if, for example, we were wanting to do this query? Well, this is a little bit more complex. So this is where, so I'm selecting from players, and that's just a simple shortcut that is select from players, like select from that table. And I can choose which fields I want to get back. And let's see how Connects handles the situation that we dealt with this morning with PG. So I'm not going to use an alias on that. So that's literally me using the query building. I hate having to scroll up all the way, but I'm selecting columns, and actually I have to go back and reformat that a little, because you see what happens is that select expects a series of parameters. We can pass as many parameters to it as we want. I got really ambitious when I was typing and forgot to separate them out. So there we go. So now I've selected all those fields. And now the next thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to join the teams table. So, join methods. I have all these joins that I want to do. By default, if I just say in SQL, join another table, what kind of join is that? Left, inner, or outer? Are we sure about that? All those in favor of inner? All those in favor of outer? All those who aren't sure what they're talking about? Jotham, I already know about you. Trust me, I already know about you. Cool. So let's see what results we get. We can try a couple different ones. Let's start with just left join. And so if I look at the syntax for left join, we can see that what it wants is 3 parameters, the table, and the 2 fields that are going to be equal to each other. Okay, so I'm going to left join teams, players.teamid, teams.id. Now, one of the mistakes that a lot of people make with connects is that they stop here and they assume that the query is running. It's not. The query is built. Until we actually tell connects that we are now running it as a callback or using the promise pattern with .then, or it's an insert and we're returning an ID or returning star, until we actually run one of the methods that will execute the query where we are now going to get data, connects has only built this query. It hasn't run it yet. So if I want to be able to do something with it, I need to go the step of calling .asCallback. And then I will have an error, I will have rows, and I will treat that just like a callback function. So and then I will just console.log out the rows, because in this case we want to see how connects handles that field overwriting thing that we ran into this morning with PG. And what we see is that it did exactly the same thing. Unfortunately, connects doesn't get any smarter with this. And I wanted to demonstrate this for a very particular reason. Connects is driven by the PG module. So it's going to make the query through the PG module to get the data and then bring it back to us. Therefore, we're still under that same kind of obligation to have to curate what these select fields are going to be in order to get the right response that we want. Because otherwise, we end up in this position again. So, now, normally, if you've written this and you remember what we did before, now we're in the situation where we would do this, right? And when I run this, it does exactly what we want, which is great. And if that was your intuition to fix it that way, then congratulations, because it is as simple as that. Basically, it's taking the field names as we put them in there and using that to build the query. The other thing that's really nice when it comes to connects, when we get to wheres and even things like this, is remember how we talked about parameterized queries? Connects is sanitizing things for us. So we're now even a little bit better insulated, but not lazy yet, because that would be bad. But we're still in a position where we're insulated from bad things happening. So I can now take this. Here's the other cool thing is rather than having to go in and edit this string, if I decide that this is hard to read, well, it's JavaScript, right? So I can just reformat this and put this one down here. Now that's a lot easier to read. So, and then especially if I start formatting things like this, if I need to go in and add some other piece to this query, like I need to go in and add a where clause, that gets nice and easy now. Dot where. So let's say dot where players dot position, and let's look for centers. Why not? So now I can run that query, and I just get back the centers. And that became a lot easier than A, having to go in and type stuff into a string, worrying about which quotation marks I was using, having to remember how PostgreSQL treats double quotes instead of single quotes. I don't have to worry about any of that. So there's less string manipulation that I as a developer have to do, which is a nice part of using this. And also, just because of the way I formatted this, modifying that query got nice and easy. With this where clause, this C is parameterized. So in the query, it will automatically be sanitized by connects, which is helpful to us. Sebastian. Unless, so the question is, where can you assume that it's sanitized? Unless you are interpolating directly into a string, if you're passing, basically, if you're passing the string as an argument to connects, you're good. If you start interpolating directly into strings, that's where things start going bad. And that's where little Bobby Tables rears his ugly head. Calgary's still good. Okay, so are we comfortable with this syntax so far? Or at least enough for this to make sense and to be able to go forward? Because I've got 30 minutes that I need to talk about something, and it's a little big and unwieldy when it comes to connects, and I want to make sure I have time. If you're not feeling comfortable with this, now is definitely the time to wave a flag. I see no flags. Yes, Sebastian. Mm-hmm. Yes, okay, yeah. So in the connects file, you can add debug true, and it will log out the query. So once connects builds the actual SQL query, it will log it out for you, which is, yeah, that's quite nice. And let's go ahead and just see what that looks like. I can just add that in here as a key to my development connection object. And there we go. So there's the SQL. So this is now the debug output, and it's showing us a lot of that information that we saw earlier from the PG, plus a little bit more. So we're seeing that the method was select. There were no extra options passed to the query. Timeouts. We see that this is a data binding. So that's data that was passed into the query. That's the C for center that we passed in as a parameter. Connects has given this query a unique ID. And then here's the actual SQL string. And here, this question mark, that's where the parameterization is happening. Question mark is actually more common to see as a parameter placeholder than the $1 that we saw this morning with PG. There are way more libraries and drivers that I see do this than the $1 or $whatever. So yeah, this is actually quite helpful to be able to see this kind of debug output, because one of the things you want to make sure as a dev is that what you envision from those methods going together is actually the query that was output. And the really cool thing is, if you're really confident in the methods and the query doesn't match, but you get the right output, perhaps Connects knows something about putting that query together that you didn't. So you can potentially learn different ways to format your query based on what Connects gives you in the debug output. So yeah, good call out on that one. Thank you. All right, so I want to talk about a big hairy topic right now, and that topic is migrations. So migrations are a term that we use quite frequently in anything to do with database administration. Migrations are how we modify our database schema over time. And when we say migration, typically we start to think about monarch butterflies or Canada geese or something like that, and we think about, flying halfway across the world to get to a warmer climate. But really what we're talking about is moving from one version to another. If you think about, if you migrated from Windows to Mac, that's a migration. Where you took your user profile stuff, your pictures and your documents and all the memes that you've been saving, and you move those over to an account on a different computer. That is also called a migration. And it's because we're moving from one state to another state. So that's kind of how we're going to define this term. In the case of a database, think about what you did 2 weeks ago with TinyApp. So in TinyApp, you went along and you were working with your URL database where you had the key in your URL database as your short URL, and the value was your long URL. And then we threw you the very real-world curveball of, now you have to have a URL database that not only keeps track of the short URL, the long URL, but also the user. So the schema that you were using to store your data, by necessity, had to change. So that shift from one state of your database to the next, that is a migration, except you had to go and do it as a very manual process and reformat that data manually. If we had to do that in production all the time, things would go very poorly for the internet. I'll just say it that way. Things would go very, very poorly. Imagine if Google was going to migrate their users' database with the millions and millions and millions and hundreds of millions of accounts, or Facebook with, 14-year-old girls that have 2 billion accounts. If they had to do that manually every time they wanted to add a field to the database, that would be very painful. So what we want is a way to script that process and automate that process. And most advanced database libraries that you will use, and I will put Connects in this category, you'll see it with Ruby and Active Record, you'll see it with a lot of different database libraries, give you the ability to manage your database schema through a process called migrations. And so when we have a migration, we're typically looking at two states. And the convention has been to call them up and down. And what up does is it says, when we apply this migration, here are the changes we want to make. Maybe we are adding a column, maybe we're creating a new table, maybe we're adding a key or an index, changing a default value on something. Maybe this field is currently a double and it needs to be an integer, things like that. That's the change that we would want to make. Down, as the opposite of that, is if we need to undo that migration. So that would just be the inverse of whatever action we had done in the up version. So if we added a column, we would drop the column. If we changed from a float to an integer, we would change back from an integer to a float. If we set a default, we would take it off. So whatever the up is, the down would be the opposite of that. And you as the developer would write both of those so that if someone is applying those migrations and needs to go forward or backward in that timeline of the different versions of the database, it would retain its integrity and behave as expected. Because here's the situation that migrations really enables. So let's say, for example, Spencer's been working on an open source project, and he's posted it up on GitHub, and he's built a little website for it, and other people are wanting to use it, and so they go and they clone his repo. But it's got a database associated with it. When they first start off, they don't have all the tables, they don't have all the fields, they don't have all the defaults and the indices and the foreign keys that he has set up. So what we need is a way to reliably bring a database in any state to matching what he has. And so if we have a series of scripts that are migration scripts, we're able to run those, ideally in order, and then ta-da, our database schema now matches what his database schema is, and we can start to use his open source project. By the way, Spencer, you're now required to make an open source project with migrations, no pressure. So in this particular case, Connects gives us the command line ability to not only create a migration, but also to run it or roll it back. And we can see that, those commands, when we do Connects help. And we see that we have migrate make, migrate latest, migrate rollback, and we can even tell what the current version of our database is. Because typically, the convention that's used by a lot of libraries is that the migration is time-stamped. And it will be in the format of year, 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 month, month, day, day, hour, hour, minute, minute, second, second. So it's a numeric timestamp. So right now it would be 2018-09-18 540, however many seconds. Like that would be the timestamp that would mark that particular migration, and that would be a unique timestamp, because unless I was able to create two migrations in exactly the same second, or manually name the files the same exact thing, which is just would be dumb for me to do, I now can easily order them, sort them, and run them in order. So that's a great way for me to be able to do that. So let's look at what happens. So if you remember this morning, I had this table that we didn't do anything with, coaches. And so it's got a name, a team ID, a created at, and an updated at. That's all it has in there. But what if I wanted to add something to this table? What if I wanted to add let's say I want to add a column for whether or not they are also the general manager. Boolean, is GM. Because a lot of coaches end up being general managers. So that would be valid to know that about a coach. So I'm going to do connects, migrate, make, and I'm going to say is coach GM. That's the name of this migration, because that reflects what I'm testing, or what I'm adding data-wise to this. So when I run that, it tells me that it's using my development environment. So if I was in production, it would use my production settings. And I see that it has created this migration for me, that it has put in a folder called migrations under where I am right now. So migrations get their own folder. And it's 2018-09-18-154130 is coachgm.js. So that's the timestamp followed by the name that I specified for my migration. So let's look at that file. We have up and down. exports.up and exports.down. So this is a file that's going to get required in as a module, and the up function will be run if we are applying the migration, and the down function will be run if we are rolling it back. So let's look at our Connects documentation, and let's look at the part that I keep scrolling past. There we go, schema builders. So I can do schema building. So I have a whole bunch of things that I am able to do. So for example, if I was dropping a column, table.drop column. Well, how would I add a column? Well, I'm going to alter. I could do that. So altering a table, that's the SQL query I would run, is I'm going to alter a table. And then what I can do is inside the callback function to alter table, I would just specify what it was I wanted to create. So we have like string, username. Here's integer with age. Yeah, I can do that. So let's see what this looks like. I'm going to return connects. We see it's connects.schema.alterTable. And which table do I want to alter? I want to alter the coaches table. And then I'm going to have a callback function. And what that callback function gets passed to it is a table object that represents my table. And here I'm going to have t.boolean is GM. So that's going to make a new Boolean column on my table called is GM. And that was not what I wanted to do. I can look at the Boolean and double check that that's what I wanted to do. Yes, it is. I'd probably want to set a default value on this so that, for example, it's always false unless I set it to true. So if I want to do defaults, default 2 and a value. So default 2 false. And that's it. I'm going to alter a table. I'm going to add a Boolean column called isGM and default it to false. It literally reads from left to right what I'm doing. And I need to write my down. That is the exact opposite of that. So I need to drop column. We saw that one up here. We're going to have table.drop column. So in that case, I'm going to once again, I'm going to alter table, coaches. I'm going to have callback function and t.drop column is GM. So I can alter table, I can add columns, I can drop them, set their default values, set their type, all within migrations. Sorry, which part? Yes? T.boolean, so my table object, if I do t.string, I'm adding a string column. And then I give it a name. Yeah. So drop column is where I'm going to, that's taking an existing column, doesn't matter what type it is, and I'm just dropping it. Whereas if I'm adding a column, I have to, for SQL, yeah, not only give it the name, but I have to say what type it is. So now, if we look at our connects commands, I have connects migrate latest and connects migrate rollback. So let's do connects migrate latest. Womp womp. Why is it complaining? Migration directory is corrupt. The following files are missing. Oh, really? So apparently I used this database once before for this, and I didn't have the create coaches. So it's wanting this particular file to create the coaches. So one moment. So connects.schema, and I can show you what a create table would look like. So I want to create the table coaches. And so in here, t.increments is going to give me my primary key because it increments every time. Yeah, serial. Yeah. And t.increments is going to use the right syntax whether I'm talking to PostgreSQL or MySQL or SQLite or whatever it may happen to be. It just knows that I'm telling it that there's going to be a field that's going to auto increment. And then I had, so I had the references. So I have the team ID on the coach. And what we saw with that one, so what I need to do is actually t.integer team ID references teams.id. So that sets up my foreign key. The references will do that for me. And then I believe I had created at. In fact, let's just cheat. Oh, name and updated at. Those are the other two. T.string name and t.date time. Well, actually, so what's interesting is when it comes to the times there, this one is really neat. Yeah, timestamps. So I can use something called timestamps. There we go. Table.timestamp adds a timestamp column that will, if I just do one as timestamp, I can name the column. If I do table.timestamps, I automatically get created at and updated at. So it will take care of building those for me. And then the other nice thing is it will automatically set the SQL function on them so that every time when a record is created, they're both set, and every time the record is modified, updated at is set. So it takes care of that part for me. So I now don't need this. I just need t.timestamps. So there's my migration for creating that table. Yeah, Sebastian.
If I want to specify the size of the name.
Oh, okay. So that's the second. If I wanted to specify the size of the field name, I would just pass a second parameter there, and that would allow me to specify the character width of that particular field. And of course, if I have an up, I need to have a down. And so connects.schema.dropTable coaches. That part's nice and easy. I don't have to worry about what fields are in there. I just want to drop the table. That's the inverse of creating the table. Great question. So, so if you have, there are methods that you can add for columns that will either on delete or on update. You can set the cascade parameter on those so that if you, for example, if I nuked the team, there would no longer be a coach for that team. So I can handle that with like the t.references. I could do an on delete and then cascade it. And then that would help, that would solve that problem. Good question though. Okay. Ta-da. So, once I put that in there, it was able to run just fine. So what Connects does is it goes to the PostgreSQL configuration tables where everything is stored about how my tables are built, and it grabs some information from there. Connects has its own tables that it uses called Connects Migrations Lock and Connects Migrations, and we're only seeing this because debug is on. And then what we are able to do is get to the point where we run this query. Alter table coaches, add column is GM Boolean default 0. And now it has been inserted into Connect's own tracking that this migration has been run. And now if I do Connect's migrate current version, it tells me that the current version is 2018-09-1815-4130. So if I look at my migrations directory, that means this is the most current migration that's been run. That's the latest one, yes. So that reflects the latest change. Let me put it this way. That reflects the latest change that was made to my database. Thanks, Mish, for repeating my question, which I didn't do. Yeah. So, why this matters? Because it seems like a lot of extra work when you can just go into pSQL and type an alter table statement or a create table statement. What it allows you to do, especially, I don't know, hypothetically, let's say tomorrow you were starting your midterms. Crazy, I know, but work with me. You're going to go through and you're going to spec out what it is you think you need to build. And you're probably going to get an idea from speccing that out, which I think Joel will tell you all about tomorrow. Joel will tell you all about that tomorrow. Right, Joel? Oh, I have no doubt. Calgary, for your benefit, Joel's a jerk. I am a jerk for their benefit. That's true. He is a jerk for your benefit. So, one of the things that's going to come out of the planning you're going to do is you're going to get a good sense of what data you think you need to collect before you have ever written a line of code. And this is something that you should be planning out before you write a line of code. So once you have that idea, you're going to want to start sketching out what those tables are, what those fields are going to be, what type of data you're going to be putting into them. And that's going to be the schema that you're going to start with. So now you have a JavaScripty way to write those out with a syntax that is arguably easier than having to do it in raw SQL. But you're going to be going along for the next 5 days after that, coding your brains out, building this midterm project. And let's say Friday afternoon, Saturday morning, all of a sudden you realize that on your coaches table, you need an isGM column because you want to be able to put a check mark next to their name if they're a GM. So what do? Do you just hop into pSQL, type alter table, and ta-da, great, you're done? That's great. That works on your computer. What about the rest of your team? Are you going to walk around to all of their computers and type the same SQL command? You add a migration. You push it into the Git repo. They download it, run connects migrate latest, and now their schema is up to date with yours. So this is a way for you to guarantee that anyone accessing your project is working on the same schema version that you are at any given point. As a collaboration tool, it is absolutely invaluable. If you were the only developer in the universe and were only working on your own projects all the time ever, sure, you could probably bypass migrations. But it would also be a pain in the butt if you ever needed to roll a change back because you'd have to remember exactly what you did after you've already closed pSQL. Whereas you can just go connects migrate rollback and it undoes the last change that was made. For example, if I do that now, So batch 2 rolled back 1 migration. So this is the migration that was rolled back, the is coach GM. We can see alter table coaches, drop column is GM. That's the query that was run. And that column's gone. So again, if you were the only developer in the universe, it'd be totally fine for you to just go in and manually do that through pSQL. But as soon as you start working with someone else, now if you don't need a column, if you need to change its value, change its name, set a default, add a column, add a whole table, add 6 tables, you have a script that you are now able to run, share, and reliably make sure that your entire team is on the same version. And that's where the real value of migrations shines. It allows you to make incremental small changes to your schema and do it in a way that is reliably reproduced for anybody who's working on that project. Cool. Any questions about that? Yep. Yeah, so every time you run connects, it is going to use the connects file to manage the connection. Correct. And that's the benefit of doing the connects init, is it just formats that file for you, and then you can make whatever changes are specific to your environments. You can manually build it into your code when you run connects, like when you do the require in. You can manually pass all those parameters in inside your script, but the connects file now becomes something that you can check in and have, again, for your project in multiple environments. Okay. Yeah, a lot of people will manually code it first because I think that's the first example they show on the site. But the connects file, it's a utility that connects gives you, and it makes it so much easier to deal with.
What about the environment? Are we using the .env file?
Okay, so what about environments? So there is a convention called a .env file, which is a hidden file in your directory that typically you do not ever check in your .env file